Hello, Peter. Hey, hi, Peter. This is Steve Brule with Studio B, formerly Studio Brule. And this is Coffee Time, a segment that we used to do on Studio Brule before the whole channel was canceled by YouTube, which I'm going to get into a little later. I don't know if I'm going to talk too much about our future plans today uh, because there's a lot to go over, and I want to take some time to explain to folks where we're headed. We started with that, doing that, Janice and I, with the fundraiser, which is still live, by the way. And we're looking for equipment to buy to upgrade our production quality on Studio B. So today I want to get into the topic of censorship and the loss of our freedoms. And I have beside on the screen here today, you'll see the upside down Canadian flag, and I've been flying that on various social media platforms when I can, because the truth is that Canada is in a mess today. There's no other way to say it. Um, it's a distressed country. It's a divided country, and it's becoming increasingly divided over the years under Trudeau, and that's a huge problem. So first, before I get into the main topic, I want to touch on a few random things that I haven't had a chance to get into anywhere else. Oh, hi, Diego and Peter. Yes, do enjoy a cold beer. I am not indulging right at the moment, but please do. Okay, so on the topic of Canadians, I'll put this up on the screen a little bit bigger for you here. How can I do? No, this button. Okay, here we go. To understand Canadians, you have to know that they voted for the rich, good-looking, dumb, high school class bully to run the country. 3 times. 3 times. And that's exactly what Trudeau is. He's a rich, good-looking, dumbest politician possibly in the history of Canadian politics. And he is pretty much a stereotypical class bully. And we saw that when he literally manhandled a woman in Parliament, which was a controversy about 3-4 years ago, I think. I'm not going to dwell too much on any one thing in this particular topic, but to get us into the mood of things, recent happenings in the world, you've heard of the various food processing plants burning down. I think the unofficial total that goes around the internet, and I wouldn't take this to the bank, but people are saying something in close to 100 processing plants have burnt down in the last year or so. Here is another one of the plants that are burning down. Wapauka manufacturing fire. Red Cross disaster volunteers are canteening for more than 70 firefighters and so on. There's quite a number of these fires that are apparently underway, or not underway now, but have occurred this year. Peter is saying that the upside down flags are also a maritime distress signal for ships. I didn't know that. And that's probably where, thank you for bringing that up, Peter, that's probably where the habit of putting an upside down flag on the internet came from originally. Because I didn't invent this. I saw other people doing it and saying that it was a sign of distress. I didn't know it was a maritime sign of distress. Okay, so I'm not going to go over this one. Some of these I probably don't have to touch on. This little first segment of a few minutes is just a few things I came across. Here is what we're dealing with here in the creeping loss of freedoms around the world, and the loss of freedom of speech in particular that concerns me in the form of censorship. Here, this guy calls himself an anti-fascist, and as we know, this is almost Orwellian, or it is Orwellian these days. People are using words in their opposite sense nowadays. He's pro-mandate, pro-vax, pro-mask, because I know the world doesn't revolve around me, she, her. All of these things are, in fact, pro the establishment. They call himself an anti-fascist. Here's another person here. Let me see if I can expand this up a little bit more. The biggest thing we can do to combat the climate crisis is to stop this fascist takeover. Well, I'm not going to go over that one either. It's not very important for this. I'm going to rush this along a little bit so we can get to the meat. I don't know why I put some of these in here. I haven't been doing these in quite a long time, so probably a few things got past the edit stage. Let's see what this one is here. Here is someone who claims to be in the media, a journalist. If someone says it's raining and another person says it's dry, it's not your job to quote them both. Your job is to look out the effing window and find out which is true, now more than ever. Of course, we know that journalists aren't doing that. And I responded to this one saying, I looked out the window and saw a mob of hate-filled woke liberals rioting and destroying the country. She's not a journalist. They were not covering that. Let's move on here. Here's this guy, Adam Schiff. You all know him. He's a representative in the House in the U.S. You've probably heard of him. Saying that we have a narrow window to act on climate change before it's too late. There's so many crises that they're calling global crises these days, and all of them, they are arguing, require a one world government and a great reset to resolve them. So of course they're pushing this narrative. And he's saying that window is closing rapidly. History will not be kind to those who stand in the way of action, if there is anyone left to write it. This is typical scaremongering, end of the world stuff. And I couldn't help but respond to him saying, keep repeating that. We were supposed to be underwater 10 years ago, if anybody remembers Al Gore and his documentary, so-called documentary, what was it called? The Inconvenient Truth. Of course, it turned out to be an inconvenient lie for them. Here, this is really comes down to when we hear all of these crises coming up, and I'm getting ahead of myself here, but Tedros, of the leader of the World Health Organization, the monkeypox to be a global crisis again, on the same order as the coronavirus and climate change. These all fall into the age-old category. I think this goes back to the first time two huts a village. Repent ye sinners, for the end's near. Some things never change, and this is exactly what they're doing today. In other words, give us all your money or you're going to die. And give us all your money anyways. So, I don't know if I should get too much into this, but basically here, it's the pandemic. The ultra-wealthy are using fear to manipulate the people into demanding the protection of a one-world government which they can control. Of course, I missed the first sentence, human activity affects the earth, including the climate, but that's where it ends. The rest, none of the science Are we back? Oh, I think I'm back here. Okay. Internet connection's been in and out today, so I apologize for any of these delays. Human activity back. Okay, bear with me, folks. This is going in and out. I'm going to just pause here for a second, if I can get another internet connection. Okay, folks, mention in the comments if you're coming through here. Okay, my sound is weak. Has the sound always been weak here, or is it? Let me see if I can up it a bit. Here's the audio settings. Check, check, check. How is that? Better? Okay. I'm going to just skip through this because we're taking too long through this section here. I'm going to get to another part of the next part of this thing. Okay, where we got the next bit here. This is not the okay. All right, folks. So this I'm going to go over a couple of other screen cap promoting this fear of COVID and fear of the climate and the production of the Great Reset. This is a typical, you've seen this a few not getting much. Okay, here we go. Okay, are we back here? I'm going to try and pledge ahead. This fellow here, another idiot, his words, of course, another idiot who doesn't understand that him not being able to enter the U.S. unvaccinated is something he needs to take up with the American government. I'm glad that all the stupids have found their political home in one party, the CPC, and for the criminally insane, the PPC. This is what we're dealing with in Canada as well. These guys who, some of them have a large audience. They think, they don't even understand that an unvaccinated person still cannot get on an airplane in Canada. And as far as I'm concerned, that is completely illegitimate. The unvaccinated are not a bigger risk to the welfare of the general welfare of the country or to other people than vaccinated people are. As you well know, and it's been reported repeatedly in the media, the vaccinated can spread the virus every bit as much as the unvaccinated. So, and here's a fellow here making that point at the bottom. Unvaccinated cannot leave the country. This is what he was saying. They can't leave the country by air. They can't fly out of the country. So let's move on ahead here. I'm going to skip a few of these because we're a bit delayed here. This guy is calling, and this is common amongst the ultra woke, the free dumb processors. They think they're clever by adding the word dumb to free, as if freedom is a dumb thing. Just the idea that somebody would think it was a good idea to say, to equate freedom with stupidity, shows you how far the mentality in Canada has really sunk. Freedom, folks. If you lose your freedom, you literally have nothing left. You are now a slave. You are subject to the whims of those in power. And that is a very, very bad situation. Freedom should be our most highly protected rights. Freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of religion, all of these kinds of things, all these freedoms. These should be the very, very first things you fight for most strongly. But this has all been replaced by this nonsense of safety. Now, we all know where the safety thing has come from. We have safe spaces now, as if universities are not all safe spaces. They are. But they don't mean your physical safety. They mean, of course, Janice has talked about this many times, they mean your safety from uncomfortable ideas. I could get on with this for a very long time, but here is an example of what's going on in Canada. These are fines that were put specifically to discourage protesters, freedom protesters. Unusual noise, $1,000. Shouting, $1,000. Urinating and defecating, $1,000. I don't know why that's even in there, because the freedom protesters were amongst the cleanest protesters ever to descend upon a capital city in any country in the world. Encumber a highway, $1,000. You notice that they never, ever charge the woke and animal rights people or any of the other groups that encumber a highway. Idling. Look at that one. I don't know if you can read it at the bottom there, but it says idling as $1,000 fine in Canada. I mean, it's hard to imagine just how far Canada has descended in such a short time. Here, this other fellow says, since nobody else wants to say it, it may get well be me. You know who I trusted most during COVID? The government. I'll read that for you again. Since nobody else is saying it, he says, it may get as well be me. I think he means yet as well be me. Know who I trusted most during COVID? The government. I mean, I'm flabbergasted just that anybody would suggest that they trust the government above all else. Specifically the Horgan government in BC and the Trudeau government in Ottawa. I knew that they were serious about the necessary new rules and distributing vaccines. This guy, I mean, I'm speechless. I'm speechless. The number of scandals that Trudeau has been involved in and that the CBC has protected him from. I don't even know how many there are anymore. I mean, his own Minister of Justice, I think, or I can't remember her name, but she had to resign because he was pressuring her. Trudeau was pressuring her not to prosecute or pursue investigation of the SNC Lavalin scandal, and that is unheard of in Canadian history. Anyways, I could get on and on about this. I'm going to push forward. My response to this is, imagine trusting authorities who locked you down, causing more suffering than the virus, destroyed businesses, forced vaccines upon you, froze your bank accounts, want to eliminate your gas, prevent you from traveling, digitally track you everywhere, feed you bugs, and eliminate your freedom and more. Imagine trusting those authorities. I mean, there aren't words for this. It's as if half of Canada is saying, please, I want to be your slave. I really don't want to be free. I want you to abuse me. Government, please, govern me harder. It's insane. There's no word for it other than utter insanity. I'm going to move on here. They're talking about injecting children with vaccines. Well, you probably can guess what I think about that. I mean, that's not the one here. This is worth reading. No vaccine for HIV after 40 years of research. This is some fellow's tweet I captured because it kind of makes a good point. No vaccine for cancer after more than 100 years of research. I don't think there's been that much on cancer, but in any case, no vaccine for the common cold. And yet, a virus mysteriously appears out of nowhere, and within 12 months, a vaccine is found by 4 pharma companies all within 1 week, and we are all mandated to take it. Let all that sink in, folks. And I'm going to go over a list of some things to update you on what's happened in the past 2.5 years. And it's staggering. And this is not, the list I'm going to go over is not even a complete list, but it's staggering the kinds of things that have happened in such a short period of time. But this little summary here is well worth highlighting. I mean, 4 companies. And we saw with the Pfizer release that their data, it's a sham. No scientific paper would ever take Pfizer's data and call that an effective vaccine. But anyways, I'm not going to get into the data on Pfizer here. This is what's going on in Canada right now with the Arrive Can Entry app. This is a digital passport that they use for monitoring, for entering Canada, but you have to disclose your vaccine status and your COVID test status and all the rest of that on it. And it was supposed to be temporary, but in any case, they will now give here's a Montreal couple was forced into a 14-day quarantine for failing to fill out the app, the ArriveCan app. It's now mandatory. It was initially a voluntary thing, I think. That was in June. Now July 7th, the Ottawa confirms that the app ArriveCan 2.0 will outlast the pandemic. In other words, it's permanent. It was launched in April 2020 and made mandatory in November of that year. And if you remember, if you go right back to the beginning of this, I don't know if you remember in Canada, but when the vaccines first came out, they were supposed to be completely voluntary. And Trudeau even went on record on TV, and nobody holds him accountable for these things. Nobody. He changes his mind. He says opposite things that he said earlier, and the media just let it slide. But he said that vaccines would not be mandatory. Then a month or two later, vaccines are mandatory. The guy gets away with saying whatever he wants, contradicting himself and lying, and the media in Canada, which of course are all paid for by Trudeau's government, they just let him get away with it. It's a crime what's going on in Canada today. You can't call Canada a free country. You just can't, unless you're just lying through your teeth. And Joe Rogan, I think, came out a week or two ago and called Trudeau, I think, a dictator, and said Canada wasn't a free country. And I've been saying this, I don't know, over a year, maybe more. We've lost our freedoms in Canada, and I think that it's too late. It's too late to get them back. I applaud the efforts. I think maybe the farmers will have some success if they get along with the truckers. Maybe if the trade unionists get together and all these big groups start to recognize that your loss of freedom is the most important, most destructive, most dangerous thing that's going on in Canada today. Maybe we have a hope. But from what I see, the number of people on the take in Canada and how far down the road is and the mentality of a huge number of Canadians, I don't think Canada can be saved. I don't. I'm sorry to say that. I hate saying that, and I hope to be proven wrong. As vaccination rates rise, it says here, and other public health measures fall, the app has quietly morphed into something else. This is a bait and switch, said Bianca Wiley, a technology expert partner at Digital Public. We should be advocating to get rid of it, and at the minimum, make sure it's turned into a voluntary technology. I agree with that. Once travel and public health measures are no longer needed, ArriveCan will continue to be available for those who choose digital interaction at the border. Notice they're saying here, those who choose, and this was only a few short weeks ago. And yet, ArriveCan glitch ordering Canadians into quarantine without reason, July 18th. Surveillance measures. Controversy in Canada did not start with ArriveCan app. Without warning, the government tracked Canadians' movements via their mobile phones throughout the pandemic. I remember this scandal coming out, and once again, it was just whisked right under the rug. The government was illegally tracking Canadians through their mobile phones without telling them from the early on in the pandemic. The idea of an app that increases efficiency at the border isn't inherently bad, McCaffrey said. Still, it must be entirely optional and only be used to collect the absolute minimum required information. Okay? ArriveCan app causing fines and unnecessary quarantines, leaving Canadians stranded, July 19th. After smoothly crossing the Canadian border, this fellow came home and had everything in order. He came home and the app said he had to quarantine. He had 4 COVID-19 shots. 4. Did not test for COVID-19, I think they mean test positive, and was not showing any symptoms. He was not told he would need to quarantine or go through testing once he arrived at the border. I checked my email and there's an email from ArriveCan saying you are quarantined. This is your 2nd day of quarantine. This is why they want these digital applications in place, because they can just stop anybody anytime they want to. They just send this little message over to you, and who do you call? You're looking at an app with nobody to contact with, no support. you can't get back to them. But if you step outside and you don't obey their quarantine, then you're stuck with like something like a $25,000 fine or something like this. The fines are huge, and maybe even more than that. Meanwhile, infectious disease physician Dr. Kale Kalina told CP24 there isn't much benefit from the fourth doses unless an individual has a poor immune system. So you're going to be required to have the fourth dose to be able to travel, and yet physicians are saying there's no benefit for it. And you'll remember that there really wasn't any benefit for any of these vaccines for healthy young people in the first place. Now that's another story, and I think we'll get into that another day. I'm going to just go on to the next segment here, and because this is a bit, whoops, I took that right out of the thing here. Okay. I've lost one of my screens, no longer start working, so it takes me a little bit longer to switch between these things now because I don't have the other screen to work with. One of the reasons why we want to get some new equipment in here is stuff is breaking down, unfortunately. Here, I'm going to expand this up for you. The WHO declares monkeypox spread a global health emergency. Okay, I mentioned this at the very outset here. Before I get into this, actually, I'm going to just, I want to take you to this list to summarize what's the kinds of things that have happened since the beginning of this pandemic. Because this is really, really kind of revealing when you see it all at one time. And where is it here? Where is that thing? I think it's, nope, not that one. Not that, not that. Here we go. Okay. This is just a quick summary. It does not include everything that happened since this pandemic began about 2.5 years ago. So back in March 2020, you can see here, we knew that COVID was almost exclusively dangerous to old people and those with existing serious health issues, which we call comorbidities. Global lockdowns started in March, 2 weeks to flatten the curve they started as. These were ignored by the elite when they felt like it. And these are keep in mind, what do you have to, this is the stuff you have to ignore, the evidence that you have to ignore in order to have that trust in the government that guy says, and to believe in the pandemics, and to believe that we are in a state of emergencies. You have to not grasp the totality of what's happened in such a short period of time. Global lockdowns right away, even though we knew at the very beginning that the coronavirus was really only dangerous to old people and those with comorbidities. And as I said, in the very first 2 weeks of this pandemic, we should have been only protecting those at risk and let everybody else go about their business, get the virus, and that's how you get herd immunity. But we had global lockdowns immediately. Then we had global mask mandates, even outdoors, even when evidence of ineffectiveness was shown, and these mask mandates were ignored by the elite when they felt like it. They carried on their life as normal. We had global travel bans, which also were ignored by the elite. By CDC order, any suspected infection would be classified as COVID-19 as cause of death. Motorcycle accidents, if you remember. People who died of heart attacks, if they tested positive for COVID-19, they were listed as cause of death COVID-19. This was the deliberate, grotesque inflation of the statistics globally. They did this so that it would appear, to try and make it appear like this was a serious pandemic, warranting all the emergency procedures that they went about implementing. They claimed that the vaccine would end the pandemic. They claimed that vaccines would be optional. They claimed that vaccines were safe and effective. Then they don't register the vaccine adverse responses. And we see, as you know today, we see healthy athletes dropping dead on the field like we've never seen before. There's something like 1,000% increase in the number of sudden adult deaths. And they even calling it sudden sudden adult death syndromes instead of vaccine adverse events. They just don't want to look even into the issue. The censorship that we've been seeing, clamp down on all social media about medical, quote, misinformation, followed by hate speech and even jokes, which I will get into. Prohibition of even discussing alternative treatments for COVID, even studies published in medical journals, for instance, the India experiment, which I talked about, which is one of the ones that got me a warning in the Studio Brûlée. They used ivermectin in that one. I'm not going to discuss one way or other today whether ivermectin works or isn't. That's not the purpose of this. But any culture which promotes science will permit, at a minimum, the questioning of whether something like ivermectin is effective or not. And they would allow people to openly discuss published studies. But no, what they did instead was, take a look here, they canceled world-class experts like Dr. Robert Malone, whose research was instrumental in the mRNA vaccine production process. An expert in that field, canceled for sounding alarm bells about mRNA vaccines. Dr. Peter McCullough, a leader and a medical director in top medical hospitals, was canceled for discussing hydroxychloroquine. Why should somebody be shut up for asking a question? The most they should be doing is say, you're wrong and here's why. But that wasn't never enough for them. They shut him up. They canceled him off of YouTube. They canceled him off of Twitter. These guys are now on Telegram instead. Then William Campbell, who won the Nobel Prize for ivermectin, also canceled, and more. Anyone, in fact, who threatened to reveal the truth of what's going on, or at least a perspective of what's going on in this so-called pandemic, was canceled. This is the world that they are creating for us now, very quickly, I might add. Then we had the introduction of vaccine mandates when vaccines were supposed to be claimed to be voluntary, at least in many parts of the world. They introduced mandates, like in Canada. Many among the elite were not getting vaccinated. If you remember, the CEO of Pfizer was caught and embarrassed for not himself getting vaccinated. Many nurses and doctors refused to take the vaccine. Why? They were the frontline workers. They were seeing what the disease was really like, and they were not seeing a need for the vaccine for themselves. They were fired. Extension of vaccines to everyone, including those known to have zero risk. Why would they do this? This is a legitimate question. Even if you dismiss everything else, why would you extend or require vaccines for people who are not at risk? It makes no sense. Then suppression of the vaccine adverse events reporting. Attack and arrest of freedom protesters who object to their freedoms being taken away from them on such flimsy excuses. On any excuse, really, your freedom is the most important thing we should be protecting. Freezing bank accounts. These are the government's actions during the last 2.5 years. Canceling of gas and oil projects like the pipeline, I forget the name of it, the famous one in Canada, US. And canceling of other exploration projects by Joe Biden. Now there's an energy crisis. Introduction of digital tracking without Canadians' knowledge in Canada. Prediction of food shortages. They were predicting food shortages. Now we're seeing food processing plants burning down. I'll say there's no evidence that this is deliberate, but I don't know if we've ever seen so many food processing plants burning down at the same time. And lo and behold, it's happening when they're predicting food shortages. That's suspicious at the very least. And before anybody just, nobody on our channel here, I think a lot of you people are open-minded. Most everybody who watches this channel is open-minded. Otherwise, you probably wouldn't watch this channel. But if you're, let's talk about conspiracy theory. A theory, I'm a chemist, I was trained in sciences. A theory is just what that is. It's a theory that's put forth to explain observed events. We've got a lot of observed events here which are way, way, way outside the norm, happening at the same time. Now, a good theory, would try to find the central thing or some central subset of things that could explain why all of these observed events are happening at the same time. That's not a conspiracy theory, that's just a theory. So what is happening? Let's just line all of these things up that are happening at the same time here. Now they're placing restrictions on the use of fertilizers by farmers in Holland, I think it's Holland, and in Canada too, 30% restriction. We know this is going to cause problems for the farmers. We know some farmers will go out of business as a result of this. And who's buying up the farmland? Bill Gates and his friends at Blackstone or BlackRock or whatever the name of that place is. But here they are, they're doing this at the same time that they're telling us there are food shortages and there will be worse food shortages and prices are already rising. Why would you restrict the use of fertilizers when there's a problem with food shortages at the same time? Why would you do that? Why would any rational person have even the nerve to suggest to their public that they would do this? It's an insult. And what's even worse is that Canadians are saying, okay, not Canadian farmers. Canadian farmers are getting upset, rightly so, for it. Because what's happening here, and this is not the first time this has happened. This happened in Europe, I think, hundreds of years ago, when they tried to convince people who were not homesteading, but I forget the term now, living on the land through generations, that they could own their land if they took out a loan from the bank and bought the land. And then they pushed the interest rates up, and then they all went bankrupt, so they lost their money and their land. Well, this is what's going on with the farmland, I think. These elite who want you to own nothing and be happy, they'll be happy to buy up that farmland if those farmers can't survive on that. And I'll remind you that in the Great Reset, the authors of the Great Reset and the World Economic Forum leaders said that there is no place for small business in the Great Reset world. That all goods and all services can best be provided by big government and big corporations. And lo and behold, what happened during the pandemic and the lockdowns? Small businesses went out of business. And here, after that's well underway, they want to put pressure on small farms who will go out of business and they'll be bought up by big farmers. Not big farmers, but the elite and their holding companies who will own all of that land. Farms are predicted to go bankrupt. Bill Gates continues to buy up prime farmland. Now, at the same time, they're promoting insects as food. And at the same time, mass production of crickets in Canada, in London, Ontario, this huge mass production of crickets facility just went online before there is even a market for them. I think this is really important. Before there's a market, who in their right mind would start up a huge production facility for crickets when there's no market for crickets in Canada? Nobody eats crickets in Canada right now, but somebody is so confident that Canadians will eat cricket that they invested in this huge production facility to start producing mountains of crickets. They know, somebody knows, that people are going to be forced to eat crickets. All of this and more is happening while the World Economic Forum promotes a one world government. And in their Great Reset, they say there will need to be a transfer of wealth from the first world to the third world. Let's talk about that transfer of wealth, for instance. Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos, Jack Dorsey, the Twitter people, all of those huge elites, they have been building for quite a few years companies in Africa, in third world countries. They have relationships with African governments. Bill Gates set up his organizations in Africa. And Africa, as anybody will know, is one of the most corrupt, governmentally run regions of the world. Money transferred from your tax dollars to those countries are going to Jeff Bezos's companies. They're going to Bill Gates's companies, companies they've already set up to receive those transfers of wealth. The transfer of sovereignty to the WHO during the global crisis. There was a bill before Canada, and I think it passed. And I don't know what happened to the one in the U.S. There was a bill in the U.S. legislation as well, saying that during times of global crisis, that a global emergency, that the World Health Organization takes precedent, takes sovereign control of your country. Canada, Trudeau, put this through the House, and I think it passed, but I could be wrong on that because I stopped following it. It's so depressing. But they're trying at least. They want the sovereignty of your country to go to the World Health Organization as long as they can call it a global emergency. And what do we have? Lo and behold, almost immediately after these bills are put through legislation, we see Tedros declare that monkeypox is a global crisis. And keep in mind that Tedros had a task force set up to study and comment on monkeypox and the severity of it in the world. And they did not. The task force voted 6-9 against declaring it a global crisis, a global emergency. Tedros overrode them himself on his word alone and said declared it to be a crisis, where it stands at crisis status right now. And this is the kind of thing they're doing at the same time as they are pushing laws through the Western countries of the world to give sovereignty over your country to the World Health Organization. And who controls the World Health Organization? It's people like Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos, Jack Dorsey, organizations like that, and their organizations. They and keep in mind that Tedros was investigated, and I think that's out to be true, that he was contributing to the gendercide in Ethiopia when he was a leader, I think a political leader in Ethiopia at that time. And I'm starting to think that that's why he was put in head of the World Health Organization, because he has a track record of pushing for genocides. Now that's a conspiracy theory, of course, but I'm mad, as you can tell, that more people in the world are not at least looking at this issue. How in the world can you explain all of these things happening in the last 2.5 years at the same time? And keep in mind that all of the actions, absolutely every response to the global so-called crises that have been happening, climate change and the coronavirus pandemic, and now we're going to see, just starting into the monkeypox pandemic, all of the responses somehow lines up exactly to support the globalization goals of the ultra-rich elite. What are the chances that every response to a so-called declared crisis just happens to push forward the goals of the World Economic Forum's Great Reset? What are the chances of that being all by accident? It's all just a coincidence. Well, I think you know what I think about that. There's no coincidence in this. Not a bit. So, I'm going to move on to a next segment here. And see if I can find this quickly. Okay, so we were here with the the WHO declaring the monkeypox spread a global health emergency. And this is in the New York Times. There have been 16,000 cases, guys. 16,000 cases in 75 countries. Let's do the math real quick on this. And that is approximately 200 cases per country. 200 cases per country. In a disease that is primarily spread by sex and between men. It's a disease between men, that men who have sex with other men have. Whether they're gay or bisexual or for whatever reason they're having, it's a male sex spread. Now that is not a very strong vector for a rapid rising pandemic. It just isn't. Stop the spread, you just stop having sex and you don't get monkeypox. You can't be walking through an airport and catch monkeypox. You can't be sitting beside somebody on a train and catch monkeypox. It doesn't spread that way. So how is it that they decided to declare monkeypox a global health emergency? Well, conveniently, if it's a global health emergency, the WHO gets to take sovereign control of your country now that your country put those laws into place. That's what they're aiming at. For the second time in 2 years, imagine that. The World Health Organization has taken the extraordinary step of declaring a global emergency. This time the cause is monkeypox, which has spread in just a few weeks to dozens of countries and infected tens of thousands of people. The monkeypox, of course, has been going on around for a lot of years in Africa. It just so happens to have spread outside of Africa recently. Tedros, the World Health Organization's Director General, on Saturday overruled a panel of advisors who could not come to consensus. Well, I don't think they were supposed to come to consensus. This is a misleading reporting here. I don't think they were supposed to come to a consensus. What they did is they voted against it. The panel voted against it. But Tedros overruled them because he wanted there to be an emergency. Okay, so there it is. It's declared use. Currently uses to describe only 2 other diseases, COVID-19 and polio. Tedros told reporters it was apparently the first time that the Director General had sidestepped his advisors to declare an emergency. Why did he sidestep on 16,000 cases in a world of over 7 billion people? And 400 countries or something like this in the world? 75 countries with 200 cases, and he sidestepped his advisors. He really wants there to be another emergency. The WHO's declaration signals a public health risk requiring coordinated international response. There's the key right there. This, in other words, a coordinated international response can obviously best be provided by a one world government. Exactly the thing that the World Economic Forum wants. The designation can lead member countries to invest significant resources in controlling an outbreak. In other words, lots of more vaccines, lots of more kickbacks to politicians who push vaccines like Trudeau. Draw more funding to the response and encourage nations to share vaccines, treatments, and other key resources for containing the outbreak. Deforestation, globalization, and climate change are creating more opportunities for pathogens to jump from animals to people. Now, an emerging virus can quickly transcend national boundaries to become a global threat. Notice they throw climate change in there. Everything has to involve climate change today. It's all the easier to scare the people into demanding a one world government. So there it is. We are being steamrolled by the global elite, and there's no science behind the decisions of the past 2.5 years. This is about the Great Reset. That would be my summary of the actions of the past 2.5 years. I'm just going to wrap up on the last, whoops, get over here, the last segment here, which, whoopsie, not that one. Where am I at here? Okay, here we go. The last segment, which is the creeping censorship of our freedom of speech and how it is selectively applied. I am getting pretty fed up with social media, particularly, it's not social media, all social media, it's the big ones, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. And that's going to have to be a session for another live stream. And I'm going to talk about how we're going to deal with that on Studio Brûlé. There's going to be more changes coming up to Studio B and how we deal with YouTube and getting our material out to you. But here, this is a post on a page on Facebook called Women's Marches Around the World, Signs, Slogans, and Inspiration. This is still up on Facebook as far as I know. You can go and find it for yourself. And they posted this picture of a woman, and this is going to the traditional, the head of, what's her name? The snake hair girl, I can't remember the names right now. The Greek god who cut off the head of Medusa, or the Greek figure. Anyways, they reversed it. And their comment is, be thankful we only want equality and not payback. This is suggesting that feminists or women in general have something to pay back men about. Somehow pushing forward, of course, hinting at the theme that almost every schoolboy and schoolgirl knows today, that apparently men have been oppressing women since the beginning of all time, which is the central lie of feminism, as you know, if you've been following our channel. Let's move on here from this one. Here was my response on that Facebook page. Payback for protecting and providing for women since the beginning of time, even those women who don't deserve it. Payback for sacrificing life and limb to build a safe, luxurious world where women can take the elevator to the penthouse and the boardroom on the backs of a mountain of dead men. Western women don't deserve Western men. So, yes, and yes, Perseus was the Greek god who cut the head off of Medusa, and that's where that image was stolen from. And that was my comment. Now, that comment got almost 500 likes and generated a long stream of, you can imagine, controversial two-sided fights, where some men saying, "Hear, hear, so true," and feminists, of course, using every vitriolic word they could come up with and claiming that, well, hey, wait a second, how come I can't get my... okay, this slide's got reversed, so keep that one in mind. And to give you the short story of that, I was suspended from posting on Facebook for that comment, for responding to the hate, the comment of the feminist. My comment got me suspended. Their post continues on unrestricted. So here, let's look at Andrea Junker, digital nomad, blah, 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 activist, media personality. I don't know why I put her up there. It's probably because of this here. At age 10, this is what she put on, I think this is Twitter. All boys should have, she's responding to the Roe versus Wade thing. So I think she's tongue-in-cheek here, but this is the kind of thing they do get away with on Twitter. Age 10, all boys have their vas deferens severed, in other words, a vasectomy. After age 25, the vasectomy can be reversed at any time if a woman agrees, and notarized, to have a child with this man. After the birth, the father has another vasectomy. It's about time we control men's bodies too. Starting to equate forced procedures on men versus elective procedures on women. They're equating those two things. And here's another woman here. You're allowed to spray a man with Raid if he's under 5'11". Of course, somebody responded, does this mean we can use elephant rifles on girls more than 200 pounds? Now, these slides must have got all mixed up here, but here I tried to make a joke to a CTV news. Okay, here's the one. Yeah, they're all mixed up. I'm sorry about this. I should have checked the order of these things better. Here's the, I can't post on Facebook for that comment. This other one, I was kicked off of Twitter. I think this is the Twitter one, for making what I thought was a joke, an obvious joke, in response to CTV saying that the 4th booster is available for anyone over the age of 18, or 18 to 40 or something like that, or 12 to 40, I can't remember. They had a news article with that headline. And so I responded to it saying, haven't had a blood clot or heart attack yet, we can help. And that's the link to the CTV article. I thought that was an obvious joke, but that got me kicked off of Twitter. And this one got me kicked off of Facebook. So here is the original post on the Facebook one. And this was the headline that I responded to, saying, suggesting that if you haven't had a heart attack or blood clot yet, we could help, and the fourth booster shot should help with that. And that's what got me kicked off of Twitter. And this is just another clip from the article. Oh, okay, I've got too many copies of this in, so it's a little bit mixed up. I'll get this process smoothed down for future episodes. Here is a woman here, calls herself a doctor, a writer and medical news contributor. Let's have a look what she said. My immunocompromised mother, caregiver, tested positive for COVID. My dad developed symptoms yesterday, and we are awaiting my beloved mother's results now. People who could not bother to mask in stores have created unimaginable distress for the families of the vulnerable. So she's blaming people who don't wear a mask for her mother's and father's COVID. Well, what can you say, folks? And here's a woman who responded back to this saying, I'm so sorry, I'm fuming at my neighbors right now. The wife answered her door unmasked and said she's got COVID. Answering her own front door, okay? Unmasked. The husband has been at my aunt's helping her and never said a word. My aunt has cancer. I'm with her daily and come home to an immunodeficient mom. This could be bad. Well, my response to that is, if you're an immunodeficient person, you should take care to protect that person. But you shouldn't expect your neighbor to answer their door in a mask. You've gone over to their house, and she's fuming at their neighbor for coming to her own front door without a mask on. She's not in public, her own front door. This is the mentality we're dealing with here today, folks. There's a mentality of people out there who want absolute and total government control over everyone's lives. Let's push forward a little bit. Here she says, Dr. Joy something or other, the only reason, and I mean the only reason we didn't have a double funeral last week is the miracle of the COVID-19 vaccines. She may actually believe this. Plus, in the case of my mom, monoclonal antibodies. Had this happened in 2020, my parents would be in body bags. The fear-mongering has worked enormously well on some of these people. They truly believe that only this vaccine is keeping them alive. And yet, all of the studies are showing that these vaccines have a maximum effective time of about 3 months, after which they're virtually zero effect, and they're only a significant effect, if they have an effect or a help, in the first few weeks of taking the vaccine. This has been in the news. So there's just no explaining the kind of fear that's out there among these people. And here she is saying, Dr. Fossey has tested positive for COVID-19 in June. Dr. Fossey has COVID. No, we love you, Dr. Fossey, and wish you a speedy recovery. Folks, these are the people who cheerlead and support the tyrannical regimes around the world throughout history. And these are the people who make those tyrannical regimes possible. And this person responds, thank you, Joy. We must all ostracize our relatives during this time of giving. Thanks. I pray that others might learn from your example. This is tongue-in-cheek. I think this is obviously kind of making fun of her. We must all ostracize our relatives during this time of giving. The tweet that this person was responding to was subsequently deleted. But this was a time, I think that the original tweet was suggesting that people should literally ostracize their own family if they don't go all in on the whole fear-mongering nonsense of the COVID. And here she's proud to got her whole huge family vaccinated on all sides, all but one, the one I speak of. So she's calling out in code one of her own family members who didn't follow her instructions to get fully vaccinated. It may be too late for my family member. Wow. This is how people on that camp are treating their own families. I've done all I can do there. Time to pray now, but save yours. In other words, ostracize your own family. I think there's a lot of us who have been ostracized by family and non-family alike for not buying into the fear-mongering, for not submitting to tyranny, for trying to protect your own bodily autonomy, for protecting your own freedom above all else. Let's remember that our freedoms, which apparently an enormous number of people in the West and around the world take fully for granted, were hard won. It took thousands of years and rivers of blood to win the small bits of freedom that we now take for granted and that many of us are rushing to throw away. Let's continue to look on and this push forward a bit. Now, this same woman had said, after being twice vaccinated and 2 boosters, so 4 times shot, and doing all of that extreme protection stuff, she got COVID. And in one of her tweets, which is now deleted, she was lamenting that how terrible she felt, but luckily she had 4 vaccine shots, or it would have been much worse. She said, pray for me. So I had my little funny bone. I got my funny bone out and whisked it off. It's not always very funny, but I thought I felt like responding in this manner, which I did. Try ivermectin. It works better than prayers. Well, that too got me a temporary restriction on Twitter. So I think that for the most part, my responses to these 3 or 4 examples that I'm showing here on Facebook and Twitter were intended to poke fun and be a little bit humorous while raising awareness to the rather extreme nature of their fear-mongering. I said, try ivermectin. It works better than prayers. There's actually medical studies that say that, but I thought I was trying to be funny, and it got me suspended. So that's the kind of censorship. It's profound, it's deep, and it's getting worse and worse and worse. And I'll tell you this, because they know the public now is accustomed to being canceled, to having your right to post on social media restricted, your right to travel restricted. The public is generally accustomed to this now. So the elite who control all these things will and are using smaller and smaller excuses. Smaller and smaller infractions will win you a timeout. And this brings me to what I'm going to introduce and I'm going to talk about in the next session, is that recently I've not been feeling very good about producing on Studio B since the Studio Brûlé cancellation. And I'm always wondering why I'm not motivated like I once was. And I haven't done these coffee sessions before. I haven't done them for months now, probably 6 or 8 months. And there's this, I've always been wondering why I'm so demotivated. And the reason is that I know that I'm self-censoring now. And that if I actually do speak my mind, I'm going to be canceled anyways and deleted. Either I'm going to be demonetized, or my channel is going to be deleted altogether, or I'm going to be kicked off of Twitter. What's the point of being on Twitter or Facebook or YouTube if you can't really speak your mind anyway? So in other words, I was starting to self-censor. And this is exactly the opposite of reason. It is completely against the motivation for starting the original Studio Brule channel up in 2012 in the first place. Our motto in starting up that channel in the first place was dealing with topics too hot for mainstream. We were in support, radically in support of freedom of speech and freedoms in general. Freedom of speech being the most important one. And so I found myself, I've been finding myself unconsciously self-censoring. And this puts me at odds with the whole purpose for doing this work in the first place. So we're going to have to talk about responses to dealing with this, and how we can move forward and get our ideas out there uncensored, despite the increasing censorial nature of social media, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube in particular. I think they are the worst of the worst. We built YouTube, okay? The creators, I am but a small one. We had 80-something thousand subscribers when they deleted YouTube, when they deleted Studio Brule. That is very small, but it's still in the top 1% or so of channel sizes on YouTube. YouTube has, I don't even know how many channels are on there. But it's that creators committed to building their channels on the assumption that, and in the beginning, this was true, the assumption that YouTube was helping them. YouTube was supporting freedom of speech, freedom of expression. YouTube did protect us in the beginning from complaints trying to get us shut down from the University of Toronto feminists with the Warren Farrell protest. YouTube defended us on that. Then YouTube put into the CEO, a feminist in the CEO position. I think around that time YouTube was sold to Google or something like that. I can't remember the exact timelines. But things started to change, and change gradually at first. And then they started to demonetize all our videos. Something like 70% of almost 600 videos on Studio Brule ended up being demonetized before they deleted the whole channel. So we're going to have to respond to this, because I can't go forward. I don't feel confident going forward on social media platforms that seek to censor us. And I can't go forward feeling self-censored, which is why I'm having this particular video today, starting up these coffee sessions again. One of the principles that I came to believe is very, very important in life, I came to believe this late in life, I think, and I think younger people should take this to heart as quickly as you can, is don't stay where you're not wanted and appreciated. And I can say this: YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, they don't appreciate us for sure. They may want to use us to build their business, but they don't like us, we're not appreciated, and they don't really want us. They just want our labor to build their business. We are submitting to that by continuing on using them. We are willingly being their work slaves. So we have to find some strategy to get away from that relationship. It's a nasty relationship. So I should wrap up here. And I hope you join me again next time on Coffee with Steve. I'm going to try and make these quite regular. This one was slightly disorganized. I apologize for that. So look for us Thursday. The next Fiamengo file is to be live streamed. And I do have a look in the comments of the last live stream with the last Fiamengo file with Janice. There's information on helping us support us with our new equipment buying. And okay, folks, thank you very much for your encouragement and your support. We're going to be speaking out again one way or another. It's only a matter of time, I think, before YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter delete us permanently, because we're not going to just ignore what we see. I could be wrong. I fully admit that there's lots of stuff I can be wrong about. That is not the point. I have the right to be wrong. And I'm okay with being wrong. I hope I'm wrong on some stuff. I hope the world is not beyond the point of no return, going to a one world government in which we are all slaves and the elite are running everything. But let's look back in history. I know I'm rambling a bit, but in history, folks, the elite never liked the middle class. They don't want a middle class. They want a slave class, and they want a small elite ruling class. That's what they're pushing for again today. And in response to Midnight Rider, I say, yes, I am on Rumble. I'm going to repeat this point in the future repeatedly, many times. The Rumble, all of the Fiamengo File 2.0, all of Studio B, this is the rebirth of Studio Brûlé, is on Rumble right now. It's automatically backed up. And the channel on Rumble is called Studio Brûlé. Please go over there and subscribe, because we're going to keep that one. I can't predict this for sure, but I don't think Rumble is in any near-term threat of deleting us. YouTube is always going to be a threat. And YouTube is always going to get tighter and tighter and tighter in their restrictions. I'll note right now that several, probably 4 or 5 of the Fiamengo files, the new Fiamengo files, have been demonetized already. I can't imagine why. And you guys have watched them. There's nothing in there that would warrant a demonetization. And yet, on YouTube's scale, these are not fit for advertisers. It's incredible. But that's the state of the world we're in, and it's getting worse. It's getting worse by the day. So, folks, I'm going to have to just call it quits there, and thank you so much for coming. And I see, thank you, MGTOW Cowboy. Great to see you guys again. I'm really glad you guys could tune in. I was wondering if anybody would, because it's been so long. So we'll see you on Thursday with the next Fiamengo file. That's Thursday at 11:30 a.m. Ciao for now, folks.